We're going live now to Maryland in the US, where Bradley Manning's lead attorney David Coombs is holding a news conference.
Whistleblowers and the extension of this crackdown to journalists threatens to stifle the flow of information that is vital to our public. And it's vital for information that we not only have a need to know, but oftentimes have a right to know. While we were successful in avoiding the aiding the enemy offense, the fact that the government pursued this offense, the fact that the government let this offense go forward even after it was clear there was no evidence of any intent to do so, should sound an alarm to every journalist. It should sound an alarm to every concerned citizen. The case of United States v. Bradley Manning is a watershed moment in history for freedom of the press. We need to decide what freedoms and individual rights we are willing to give up in the name of national security. And we've heard a lot recently from the Obama administration about oversight. We've been told to trust that the oversight mechanisms that are within the executive branch are striking an appropriate balance. We've been told that they know what is in the public's interest to know, as opposed to what is national security and cannot be revealed. And you have to ask yourself, is the government striking an appropriate balance? The ultimate role of oversight in America has always belonged to the American people. And it is only to the extent that the American people can be informed as to these matters that oversight works at all. And there are too many things we do not know about our national security apparatus. We don't know how it works. We don't know the extent of its reach. And in order to close this gap, we need a free and vibrant press. We need members of the press who are not potential subjects of criminal investigation for receiving information, which is their very job to do as watchdogs of our government. In order to close this gap, we need whistleblowers like PFC Manning, people who are not afraid to stand up and speak the truth, and to risk their freedom for the ability to keep us informed. In order to close this gap, we need a public that cares. We need a public that is concerned about what is happening. We need all of these things because, make no mistake about it, the cancer of overclassification is threatening the very fabric of our free society. Overclassification hinders debate. It hinders what we know about our government. It hinders finding solutions to common problems, and that is, how do we keep our way of life in a post-9/11 world? PFC Manning was one of the brave Americans who was not willing to remain silent. Instead, he decided to provide us with information that he believed would spark reforms, would spark debate, and he provided us with information that he believed might change the world. Due to his decisions, he has been called a traitor. He's been accused of having blood on his hands. He's endured 3 years in confinement, many of that in unlawful pretrial confinement that was specifically designed to break his spirit. He's endured what is now evident to everyone, a baseless aiding the enemy offense that at the time carried the death penalty and then carried life without the possibility of parole. And now he is enduring a 35-year sentence. The time to end Brad's suffering is now. The time for our president to focus on protecting whistleblowers instead of punishing them is now. The time for our president to pardon PFC Manning is now. Early next week, I will file, on behalf of my client, PFC Manning, a request that will be routed through the Secretary of the Army, through the President, through the Secretary of the Army for the President, a request that the President pardon PFC Manning, or at the very least commute his sentence to time served. And I want to share with you PFC Manning's statement that's part of this request. And so I'll read it to you. The decisions that I made in 2010 were made out of a concern for my country and the world that we live in. Since the tragic events of 9/11, our country has been at war. We have been at war with an enemy that chooses not to meet us on a traditional battlefield. And due to this fact, we've had to alter our methods of combating the risks posed to us in our way of life. I initially agreed with these methods and chose to volunteer to help defend my country. It was not until I was in Iraq and reading secret military reports on a daily basis that I started to question the morality of what we were doing. It was at this time I realized that our efforts to meet the risk posed to us by the enemy, we have forgotten our humanity. We consciously elected to devalue human life both in Iraq and Afghanistan. When we engaged those that we perceived were the enemy, we sometimes killed innocent civilians. Whenever we killed innocent civilians, instead of accepting responsibility for our conduct, we elected to hide behind the veil of national security and classified information in order to avoid any public accountability. In our zeal to kill the enemy, we internally debated the definition of torture. In our zeal to kill the enemy, we internally debated the definition of torture. We held individuals at Guantanamo for years without due process. We inexplicably turned a blind eye to torture and executions by the Iraqi government. And we stomached countless other acts in the name of our war on terror. Patriotism is often the cry extolled when morally questionable acts are advocated by those in power. When these cries of patriotism drown out any logically based dissension, it is usually the American soldier that is given the order to carry out some ill-conceived mission. Our nation has had similar dark moments for the virtues of democracy. The Trail of Tears, the Dred Scott decision, McCarthyism, and the Japanese-American internment camps, to mention a few. I am confident that many of the actions since 9/11 will one day be viewed in a similar light. As the late Howard Zinn once said, there is not a flag large enough to cover the shame of killing innocent people. I understand that my actions violated the law. I regret if my actions hurt anyone or harm the United States. It was never my intent to hurt anyone. I only wanted to help people. When I chose to disclose classified information, I did so out of a love for my country and a sense of duty to others. If you deny my request for a pardon, I will serve my time knowing that sometimes you have to pay a heavy price to live in a free society. I will gladly pay that price if it means we could have a country that is truly conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all, and he puts in here women and men, are created equal. Now, the family of Bradley Manning has asked me to read the following statement. We are saddened and disappointed in today's sentence. We continue to believe that Brad's intentions were good and that he believed he was acting in the best interest of this country. We will again like to thank his extraordinary defense team for their tireless efforts on his behalf. And of course, we want to thank Courage to Resist, the Bradley Manning Support Network, and the thousands of supporters around the world who have stood with Brad throughout this ordeal. Please know that his fight is not over. And actually, I couldn't have ended that better, because his fight is not over. My representation of him at a court-martial may end, but my representation of him and ensuring that he one day, and one day very soon, walks out of Fort Leavenworth has just begun. And with that, I will gladly answer any questions, and I know there might be a few, so raise your hand, I'll point at you, and I'll ask away.
What do you see is at stake here?
I think what's at stake here is how do we as a public want to be informed about what our government does. The national security apparatus in this country has exploded since 9/11. And you don't even understand how much money gets put into national security defense because that itself is secret. So I think what's at stake here is how do we want to live as a country? And what do we want to say that we will do as a country in our self-defense? And what do we want to not do? And it's important, that last part, what do we not want to do? Because that's what makes us different from the enemy that we are facing. We don't torture. We don't hold people for years without due process. We don't target for assassination innocent American people. We don't do that as a country. So I think what's at stake is what history will say to us, how we acted. And we haven't learned that. As Bradley pointed out, the Japanese-American internment camps, McCarthyism, just to name a few things in our past, not so distant past, where we should be ashamed of how we treated a sector of our public for no other reason than they now were somehow targeted as a potential enemy. Yeah.
Over Euronews, what are going to be your next steps, your next actions as his legal representative?
Well, to get attention to what's happened here, I will be submitting post-trial matters for him to the convening authority, and that is a time in which his sentence could be reduced. The convening authority has the power to do that. After that, then I will represent him for future parole and clemency issues. Hopefully the president does the right thing, and those are ruled out as options because he pardons them or he releases them with time served.
In the statement that you just read out, Private Manning said that he did what he did out of concern for his country and out of patriotism, but he also said he was sorry for hurting the United States. And I'm just wondering, does he stand by his actions, or are there things now that he would have done differently? Does he have regrets?
Well, obviously, in everything you do in life, hindsight's 20/20. What I can tell you about Bradley Manning is he's a very moral person, and that morality has been with him from the beginning. I believe that when he went there, and you can see this from his conversations with Lauren McNamara, the chat conversations that were admitted into evidence, he went there with the goal of hopefully saving lives. He went there with the goal of helping his command ensure that every soldier, every contractor got home safely, and even the local nationals got home safely. I think he would still be troubled and was troubled by what he saw. I certainly believe that because of his strong sense of morality, he would do the same thing. Yes.
You also mentioned in your opening that he believes that you released the information because it would spark a debate, it would potentially spark some sort of reform. I mean, at this point, putting all the court-martial aside, all the judicial side, does he believe that the information he released sparked a debate or any kind of reform? And then if I can just ask you a technical question. I think a lot of the reporters are confused about when exactly he will be eligible for parole, specifically under today's, assuming there's no difference in the appeal or whatnot, when he's eligible for parole.
Okay. So the Apache helicopter video sparked a debate. You didn't have to be a person who was for or against the war to see that something was wrong with that video. The SIGACs, the Significant Activity Reports, I think those are historically very significant because it shows the extent of innocent civilian deaths that were underreported. It also shows what we ask our men and women, our very brave men and women in uniform to do on a daily basis, every day, in a combat environment. The diplomatic cable certainly sparked debate because in America we have the luxury of believing that we always do the right thing. We are the good guys. We're the white hats. We do things because it's the right thing to do, not because it's just in our interest. That's what a lot of people believe. You can't read the cables and come away with that belief. You see that we sometimes make bad decisions because it's in our national interest and not necessarily in the interest of citizens as a whole. And we ought to expect more of our country than that. We should expect that sometimes we'd make a deal or take a position that's not to our advantage because it's the right thing to do. Now, with regards to the sentence, if nothing happens and he has a 35-year sentence, under military rules, after 10 years, he would be eligible for parole. And he would go in front of a parole and clemency board at the 10-year mark. If he's denied parole that first time, he's reviewed every year thereafter. I personally have never done a parole and clemency board, but I will be the smartest person 7 years from now on everything involving parole and clemency.
This includes his time served, or I'm sorry, the 1,294 days.
Right, so he gets credit for that, so he's got another 7 years before his first look. And I'll go it on this side, and then I'll come back over. Yes.
If you were advising would you suggest that he hand over to the United States to face trial?
Well, you know, if he were my client at this point, I would tell him that the current environment is not one that's friendly to whistleblowers, certainly. We certainly should have a discussion on what are appropriate leaks and what steps you should go to get this information out. But you look at Thomas Drake, for example. He's a prime example of a whistleblower who tried to take every step that you would expect a whistleblower to take prior to giving it to a journalist. And it didn't lead him to anywhere. So instead of signing whistleblower protections, we need to actually get something to where a whistleblower can go to a journalist, a group of journalists who are not subjected to the government, and they can make a determination. Is this the type of information that the American public needs to know? Or does it truly pose a danger to national security? One more on this side. Yeah.
What did Private Mannings say to you after he was sentenced?
You know, he, after he was sentenced, we went back into the room. Myself and others were in tears because this means a lot to us. And so you get this guy, and he looks to me and he says, "It's okay. It's all right. Don't worry about it. It's all right. I know you did your best. It's going to be okay. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to get through this." So I'm in a position where my client is cheering me up. And that shouldn't happen. I should be, as the attorney, cheering him up. But he is a resilient young man. If nothing else, he is resilient, for sure.
Elliot Francis, WAMU 85 News. As you just said, you care quite deeply for your client. Many other people in this room do as well. I'm sure they're concerned about his welfare going forward. To the best of your knowledge, how much support do you think Manning will get in Leavenworth and going forward with some of the so-called gender confusion issues that were revealed in testimony?
I don't know for sure yet. That is something that I'm currently looking at. In addition to becoming the smartest person on pardons, I'm going to become the smartest person on ensuring that a soldier who is in confinement who has gender dysphoria gets appropriate medical treatment. I know that recently there was a story, I think Courthouse News ran it, where a Fort Leavenworth spokesperson said, we don't have certain treatment. That's not what we give. I'm going to change that.
Washington, do you feel that the sentence or any part of it was used to send a message to others, perhaps as a deterrent?
Well, yeah, 35 years would be a strong deterrent to doing this. That's why brave people step forward with information at great personal risk. The deterrent here, I think, also started very early on with the aiding the enemy offense. If you are faced with a death penalty offense for doing something of just giving information to you, a journalist, that's scary. This is not the America that I would hope that we live in. And so I think certainly this was designed to send a message. And I'm hoping that what we do as an American public is we redefine what that message is and say this is not what we want the outcome to be. And that would result in the president hopefully pardoning my client.
Do you believe your client received a fair trial?
You know, that I will tell you that There are many things about the military justice system I love, but when it comes to a fair trial, what's important is what is the perception of the public? Is it perceived as a fair trial? And in this instance, that answer would have to be no. And that's sad, because you have a trial where the biggest problem for fairness is a rule that I'm also going to be pushing. So it sounds like I'm going to be quite busy. But I'm going to try to change RCM 806, Rule for Court Martial 806, which prevents you, the media, from being in the courtroom with cameras rolling, showing everything that happens in the courtroom. If you could have cameras in the courtroom, do you think for a moment you wouldn't have, well, I don't know, say Nancy Grace, not present every day, live from Fort Meade, saying what happens? And if you had cameras in the courtroom, a lot of the stuff that happened would not have happened, because the American public would see it and they would say, you know, this isn't fair. So I think from a representation standpoint, we did everything to ensure he got a fair trial. But I don't believe that the public's going to perceive it as such. Oh, actually, one over here, right there.
How did pleading guilty to 10 lesser counts of attractive defense?
Well, the goal there, and that also should kind of give you some insight to what was happening. A lot of people criticize that move. Why would you plead guilty without some sort of benefit of a deal? And you can only have a benefit of a deal if you have a partner on the other side that's willing to deal. And so by pleading guilty to the lesser included offenses, it gave P.C. Manning an opportunity to accept responsibility, because he wasn't trying to say he didn't do it. And I was hoping that it would also send a message to the court saying that the government is not a reasonable partner in this negotiation. And oftentimes that comes back to sentencing credit. You get credit for accepting responsibility. You get credit for entering into stipulations of expected testimony that saves the court time. 35 years doesn't seem like he got much credit.
Who's the winner and who's the loser if there's any?
I think the winner in this case is the public, because they got information that they needed to receive in order to see what our country is doing, and to really spark the discussion that is currently going on right now. The loser is anybody who hopes that you'll have whistleblowers in the future willing to come forward. Because, as I said before, this does send a message, and it's a chilling one. And it's endorsed at the very highest levels. This administration has gone after more whistleblowers than the previous ones combined. So hopefully we change that in the near future.
There's a report out there that this is the longest sentence anyone has ever received.
Well, we've been listening to David Coombs. He's the lead lawyer, as they call it in the United States, for Bradley Manning, the American soldier who was convicted of supplying espionage material, that's what the court thought, to the organisation WikiLeaks, and Bradley Manning was sentenced to 35 years in prison. The prosecutor